Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to the Energy Realities on Monday morning, live on X, YouTube, and LinkedIn. We have a wonderful show. We're waiting for Tammy Nemeth from the Nemeth Report. She'll be here in a little bit, but we've got David Blackmon. David Blackmon is a legend in my mind. He is absolutely all over the planet at the Daily Caller, Forbes, and everywhere you can possibly imagine. David, welcome. How are you today?
I'm glad there's one person who thinks I'm a legend, Stu. It's always comforting to know. I'm fine.
You've had a lot of great things coming around the corner, and here comes Tammy, and she's rolling into the stage. We have also Irina Slav, and Irina is also over there at oilprice.com. She's got her own Substack. And I mean, I absolutely love your Substack. She is a great authoress out there, or author. How are you today?
I'm great. Thank you, Stu. It's a lovely spring day.
Oh, how's the gardening going?
It's going well now that it's warmer. Everything is growing, including a lot of weeds, but we'll take care of that.
Oh, outstanding. I'll tell you what, we have got a heck of a show. I'm Stu Turley, President and CEO of the Sandstone Group, and I'll tell you what, net zero is dividing the world into those that have energy and those that do not have energy. And it's also a strong correlation between fiscal responsibility, those with GDP growth and those without GDP growth. So this conversation is not only just, is net zero dividing the world? What kind of shape is it's going on? David, what are your thoughts there?
Well, that's absolutely right. And I think, there's a general awakening that net zero is actually an unattainable goal, and even another awakening that it is a scam, and always has been a scam, a tool to use to invoke global style, authoritarian style of government over all free countries. And we see that happening in real time in Germany. We see it happening in the UK, see it happening in New Zealand, Australia, Canada. And we did see it for 4 years happening in the United States. Luckily, we still have free elections in the United States sometimes, and last November's election went the right way. And so we'll get a 4-year respite from it. I think even Al Gore now understands, and I want to reference an op-ed he wrote at the Wall Street Journal last week, understands that the fraud that is net zero goal is dying. And he wrote a piece in the Wall Street Journal last week in which he admits and catalogs a series of withdrawals from international agreements by big investment houses, by insurance companies, in both Europe and the United States, from these net zero alliances that are falling apart. And he talks about the fact that the United States and EU governments are backing away from some of their net zero goals now. The United States is just willy-nilly going to cancel everything Biden did. At the end of the day, that's another another topic for another show. But then the rest of his piece focuses on trying to encourage the big investment houses and companies to continue to ramp up their investments in low carbon energy solutions, and spends several paragraphs touting his own scam in that realm that he's a partner in. And so even Al Gore understands the world is changing, and it's changing very rapidly. The landscape is changing very rapidly where climate alarmism is concerned. I think it's a net positive for the whole world that the United States is now playing a leading role in making that happen. And over the weekend, one last thing I want to reference. While all these countries in Europe, the EU and Germany, UK, and others are still, maintaining their headlong dash into this net zero madness, deindustrializing their economies, the Prime Minister of India put out a very public post on Sunday celebrating the fact that India has now achieved a record level of coal production, right? That's what India's proud of in the energy space. And at the same time, China, of course, last year permitted the building of more new coal plants in a single year than all the existing fleet of coal plants in the rest of the world. So without India and China on board, net zero is a fantasy. It was always a fantasy, even with them on board. Certainly can't succeed without them on board, and the whole thing is falling apart. So we even see Al Gore now preaching an alternative narrative, and that's a net positive for everybody, I think.
David, this brings up a point that you had shared out on LinkedIn from one of your friends out there. I'm not sure where this came, but this is a beautiful representation. And we take a look in the 1800s for our podcast listeners. Out in the 1800s, there's wood, sticks. And then you come over here to the 2000s and you look at coal, oil, gas, nuclear. And it is really renewables on the trillions of dollars of renewable, unsustainable energy, how much it's really added to it. And it's really not that much. I mean, it's less than.
No, it's an amazing graphic. It shows basically that we still get about 80% of our primary energy from fossil fuels. Today, despite $20 trillion in subsidy investment for renewable energy, which is essentially the same percentage that fossil fuels provided in 1995. So there's been virtually no change in primary energy delivery. The other thing this shows, well, it doesn't show because it only goes through 2020. So it doesn't show the last 4 years of the ramp up again in what they call traditional biomass, which is essentially burning wood for energy.
Right.
England began its transition away from burning wood for energy to burning coal in the 16th century, 500 years ago. And last year, we burned a record amount of wood for energy, an all-time record high globally. So energy transitions never eliminate the existing fuel source. They only add to fuel sources, and that's exactly what's been happening in this, quote, energy transition we're supposed to be in the middle of. So it's a wonderful graphic. I wish I knew exactly who created it, but I don't.
Speaking of biomass,
look at how demand has risen.
Yes, and demand is just spiked since,
It's skyrocketed.
Yeah.
Tammy, speaking of biomass, Heathrow had a horrific issue. And let me show you what on Heathrow's had a power outage. Was it Thursday evening, Friday morning, our time, and something like that. And Heathrow's emergency backup systems went to net zero for biomass reasons, and their infrastructure is absolutely horrific. So let's go to this video here.
Obviously requires a backup. And I can exclusively reveal this morning to you, your viewers and your listeners, having spoken to an industry expert, it appears that Heathrow had changed its backup systems in order to be, wait for it, net zero compliant. And therefore they had got rid of their diesel generators and had moved towards a biomass generator that was designed not to completely replace the grid, but work alongside the grid. And therefore, basically, their net zero compliant backup system has completely failed in its core function at the first time of asking. I mean, it beggars belief. Some critical.
And so when you sit back and kind of go, Heathrow going down is absolutely horrific, Tammy. How are you this morning? You're having some technical difficulties this morning.
Yeah, I don't know. It must be because I was working on the carbon border adjustment mechanism article, and my computer won't function. So I'm on my iPad, and I have to move around the house because it uses the Wi-Fi in our old house that's hard to get a good signal. So yeah, I know the Heathrow thing was very fascinating. Catherine Porter on What Logic had a really great detailed assessment of the grid and what they were supposed to do and whatnot. And I forget if it was she or someone else had talked about some of the American airports have backup electricity so that they could run for days without being on the grid. So it's like Heathrow, which is like one of the biggest airports in the world, doesn't have that, and that supposedly this backup system is not really a backup, but it runs these other things in parallel. I don't know. The whole thing is,
You can go to
just
energynewsbeat.co, and their first article up there has got a detailed history on it on my Substack as well. It's pathetic.
It is. And, this is what I find so interesting and contradictory, because on the one hand, the environmental people who are part of the climate change committee want to shut down air travel, except for certain times for people or, for the elites and that kind of thing. But then there's others who are encouraging, like Rachel Reeves, who's a die-hard socialist and full on with this green stuff, wanted to expand the runways at Heathrow and was giving approval to expand the runway at Heathrow. And in Canada, they're trying to encourage the pension funds to take over the investment in airports. So on the one hand, they're like, we're going to shut down the airports, but we want pension funds to invest in them, and we're going to expand airports, but who's going to be using them? I don't understand. So it's one of these, green contradictions that we talk often about on the channel.
So, Irina, what do you think about the EU in net zero?
Well, I think companies are moving in the opposite direction of governments. From what I've been reading, all these companies, not just in the United States, but some European companies, large companies, are reconsidering their net zero pledges and commitments and the sustainability language. There was a news story in the Financial Times just a couple of days ago, was it today? I can't remember, saying that the FT just went and looked at companies' websites about their commitments and slashing emissions and all that. And they have pulled these texts. I'm sure that pretty much everyone is doing it in the corporate world. Some of them are blaming Trump, of course. The Wall Street Journal is blaming Trump. It's all Trump's fault because of this pressure. But I think, as I've written in my Substack today, that they're doing it with a deep, deep sigh of relief. That now they have an excuse to start walking back these commitments. But the governments in Europe, the central brain of this creature that the EU has become, is still doubling down on stupid. It will take a while before they realize that corporate money is not coming, because they don't want to waste this money. And another interesting story that confirms this is from China, it's from Bloomberg, where the Chinese corporate world is, that they have realized they've reached the point of oversaturation with solar specifically. And there was one guy, an executive, I think, saying that coal and gas are going nowhere because they're providing very, very necessary backup, Heathrow Airport, backup wind and solar, because they can't operate without backup. Hence all these new coal power plant approvals last year. So diverging paths between corporates and governments is going to be interesting.
I think we've got a video, Tammy, that really shows someone that understands net zero and tea. And I think that when we sit back and understand the people that are defining net zero financial policies and energy policies may not have all the information, but let's hear your thoughts on this one.
Because I've never had any before, so I'm trying Sleepy Time tea, and I got the big one because I'm assuming that I'll probably like it. So I've got this out of the package. It's just the square of tea. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. I already have my hot water
Pause
sitting
it,
right
Stu.
here.
Can you pause it?
Yes.
So this is what it looks like.
So everybody needs to understand this is a 2021 clip of Jennifer Granholm developing energy policy at the Department of Energy. Go ahead. She looked
And
much
then you
younger.
just dump it in. Let me get a spoon quick. All right, so you stir it around, and I'm assuming it'll dissolve into the tea at some point, maybe just in a couple minutes. It's been a few minutes and nothing has happened. I tried it, obviously, and it was a total mess, so they really should make something that contains it. Otherwise, it just goes everywhere. 0 out of 10. Today.
I think
Oh my gosh.
This is
that
Is
is
that
a
for real?
perfect example of energy policy based on climate activism without an understanding of physics or fiscal responsibility.
Well, unless there was that study that said tea bags like that are sources of microplastics or something.
Oh my God.
Aren't they made of paper?
I don't know, but this is what the study said, that you shouldn't use tea bags like that because it puts, I don't know, some chemical in, in your
Fine,
tea.
use a strainer. Oh.
Yeah,
Hey,
I know.
I want to reinforce a point Irina made about the changing corporate language around climate change and the fact that they're backing off these commitments. Everyone should think back. If you ever have watched investor presentations by the CEOs of these big corporations, think back to the 2020 through 2022 timeframe. And if you watched any of those, listened to them, you would see the CEOs of major oil companies, coal companies, every company you can imagine, leading off their investor presentation with their climate change commitments and their ESG plans and all this stuff that was not central to their core business. I listened to, well, I won't say which company, but the investor presentation of one of the big oil companies back in February. Zero mention of any of that, other than the investments their business unit on these kinds of projects are making and the profitability of those projects, not the climate impacts of the projects, but the profitability of them. It's a complete change in priorities, complete change in language. It began at the end of 2022, early 2023. We saw the first manifestation of it at the CERAWeek conference in 2023, when there was just this big focus on energy security rather than climate change, and it's only expanded since then. And it's a welcome change because these companies are focused back on their core businesses and doing what they're supposed to do, which is maximizing profits for their investors.
Okay, so I will add to that because I've been doing all this research on the carbon border adjustment mechanism, which kicks in for real next year. So right now it's been a transition for how companies should calculate their emissions and how they should set up their infrastructure to do so, and then this whole process for reporting. Now everybody thinks with the carbon border adjustment mechanism it's just a tariff, but it's more than a tariff. It creates an entirely new bureaucracy in order to calculate, verify, report, and then decide how much an importer will have to pay for whatever they're importing. Now, right now, it's 6 major high-emitting commodities or products, but eventually there'll be everything that's on the European trading system. So by 2030, it's almost everything. So for the EU, it's great that the companies are like, well, I don't really want to have to talk about this. Let's sort of move back to our main focus and everything. But there's no moves to get rid of this. They're doubling down on it, and by 2030, it will cover almost every product entering the European Union. So, I mean, maybe companies should say, well, I don't want to deal with the EU. I don't want to export because we're going to have to invest all this money into counting our emissions. And it's not that they care about what your environmental regulations are. Like if you're really looking, you have all these regulations for managing the water and the land or your employees. They don't care about any of that. They only care about what your embedded emissions are. And it goes through the entire supply chain, scope 1, 2, and 3. So
Oh.
it's crazy. And on the one hand, it's when we talked about the bifurcation last year, where you had the BRICS going in one direction and you had the Western nations with the EU and the G7 and everybody on the other. And now that America is joining basically where the BRICS were at and saying, we don't want to have to do all this stuff. But then at the same time, you have California introducing carbon disclosures. You've got New York just introduced it. I think Illinois might have been introducing something in their legislation. So you have blue states that are going to be demanding this information. Then you have people who are going to have to export to the EU, or they'll have to find a different thing. So there's all these divisions taking place, and what that will mean for how companies operate, where they trade, and all of that. I think we're just sort of at the beginning of how this is all going to play out.
Tammy, you just nailed a huge home run mess, and congratulations on Monday morning here in the United States for what a mess. But an honest question is, the Obama era EPA regulations of putting in CO2 as a pollutant, which is actually plant food, and you sit back and kind of go, wait a minute, the place gets greener with CO2. It's the pollutants and particulate matter in a coal plant or the other kind of things that redefinition is going to go on. What do you think as a world, and I'm going to open this up to the panel, net zero, or what does the redefinition of CO2 mean to the rest of the world for net zero?
That's a great question. I don't know. I don't know how that'll play out. I think countries like India will say, wow, that's great. We don't have to worry about that anymore. China's trying to play all sides. I mean, one of the articles I'm going to talk about is the UK going over there, signing who knows what deals, memorandum of understanding. At the same time, the UK government is announcing they're going to put solar panels on every school and government buildings and so on. Well, where are you getting those from? Well, we're going to buy them from China until we make them in the UK. When are you ever going to make them in the UK? Unless it's a Chinese company that sets up here. With what energy? Right? I mean, we don't have the materials, don't have the energy. So they're just going to keep importing container after container of Chinese solar panels. So China's like, yeah, okay, we can report all this stuff because, we probably with social credit already have all that data and information. And if not, we can make it up, and who's going to verify it? Now, the EU market does have provision for verification, and they will actually in the little flow chart I saw, they will send inspectors to foreign countries to verify what they're doing. I'm like, okay, how is that going to work? In China, are they going to hire local Chinese who will carry out the inspections? How does that work?
And how do you verify these numbers? Yeah, emission numbers. How?
Right. So they go there, they inspect their data, or I don't know, their processes. They want geolocation for where they're getting their energy from. And I'm like, okay, well, China will say, we have these factories in this particular province and they have X amount of solar and wind. Ta-da, we've got, green electricity, right? And who's going to say, I'm sorry, China, we think you're lying. Can we still have those solar panels you're making for us? Like it makes, anyway, so that's my little thing for today.
I noticed that I have 0 views on X, and I've had people saying it's not showing out there. So I'm even being throttled on X when you start talking about net zero. So.
Yeah, and I'm being throttled on LinkedIn.
Oh, yeah. So everybody needs to subscribe to our Substack so this can go out there.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Are we streaming from Substack?
Streaming, no. The Substack doesn't have that capability unless you use their tool.
Right.
Okay.
We can't do so.
Okay.
But we will repost this at Substack.
Right.
And on YouTube.
But you
The
know,
problem is with YouTube is that they're going to throttle it and it's hard to find. And so, yes, the thing for people to do is check our various Substack accounts.
I'm this whole thing of policies generated by people on the left have a negative impact, and we're seeing that play out with Tesla. Tesla is a great brand. I want the choice to be able to buy an electric car or not buy an electric car. And if I buy an electric car, I'm buying a Tesla. I like the fact that it's going to be able to make life better for people for driving longer periods of time. I've got a 90-year-old dad. I'd love to be able to see him drive till he's 95 with a Tesla, an auto driving Tesla. But why is the left being so bad? So the people making left-wing decisions is like a wife doing something really bad to a husband. I mean, there are things that just shouldn't be done. Now, imagine if you're making policies and you put all these airheads.
I don't understand that analogy. Go ahead.
But if you make all these policies, it's like putting a bunch of airheads in lemonade and then forcing the rest of the public to drink it, like this poor woman did to her husband.
You know they stopped making the Evo. What is it called? Is it the Evo?
This
The
is
little
like
Range
us
Rover, the
trying
big
to
Range Rover.
do net zero policies.
You with us? Damn! Oh, what's wrong with you?
Look at that. This tastes like fresh lemon juice. Hey, this ain't lemonade. Look at this.
It's lemonade.
Hey, it ain't no them.
Oh, I like my lemonade a little tart.
People that make policies think that they're giving us lemonade, but it's actually so tart we cannot even stand it when we start failing as an economy.
Yeah,
That's
they keep asking, why aren't you drinking the lemonade? It's so good for the planet.
And a shout out to Gail. She's seeing it on LinkedIn, and Patrick, you're on LinkedIn, and Greg is on your LinkedIn, so it's not totally shut down.
It's interesting.
Yeah, Greg doesn't like us much, but go ahead.
Oh, cool. Sorry. I like all forms of. If you hate us, give us your feedback. That means you're watching.
It's like Lyndon Johnson. I don't care what people are saying about me, just as long as they're talking about me.
Right.
It wasn't wrong.
I actually like open discussions. And David, your open discussion is kind of like what the Biden administration did when they buried this report. This was a fairly huge story that LNG was shut down. And our own president did not know that he did when he was speaking with Speaker Johnson. And Speaker Johnson goes, "Wait a minute, you did not shut down LNG?" Huh.
So this story, the news media suddenly found this story this past week, late last week, and I look back, and I had actually, someone had revealed this to me, and I think I know who it was, and I probably shouldn't mention. In Washington D.C. had revealed this to me, and I actually wrote about it in a piece in the Daily Caller last September, but it didn't make a lot of news at that time. And that is that DOE on this stupid, ludicrous LNG pause that Biden, Granholm, and John Podesta put into effect in January of 2024 and lasted a full year, had zero basis in anything resembling science. And it turned out that the Department of Energy, even though it pretended to be conducting its own study last year, had actually conducted the exact same study in 2023 and found that LNG exports and LNG production globally is actually a net benefit to the United States, and both environmentally and economically. And of course, Jennifer Granholm and the people at DOE decided, well, we have to hide that 2023 study because we're pretending to conduct the same study in 2024, but they didn't succeed in hiding it permanently. And so the media actually reported on it last week, 6 months too late, but whatever, better late than never. And, but it's just it's the lengths the Biden administration would go in order to, create this insane suite of energy and climate policies, all based on hysteria about, too much plant food in the atmosphere. And now, of course, we have an energy secretary and an EPA administrator who are going about reversing that, all that stuff. And of course, EPA is going to reconsider the endangerment finding, and I think we'll succeed in reversing it. And that's going to put every policy both Biden and Obama put into place in real jeopardy of being reversed. Gail Campbell Andrus, I have the same conclusion, but I'm coming at the net zero issue from a different angle. I am in the private sector and can make fuel efficient devices for transport trailers and large trucks. Yes, I cannot get introduced to anyone involved in carbon markets or carbon credit markets. I'm led to believe that carbon markets are fraud. Yes, a lot of us are led to believe that. U.S. companies are interested in investing in my company until they find out I'm located in Canada. Oh, God, okay. I should have incorporated in the U.S., it seems. Oh, boy. Well, I'm sorry you had difficulties. But she illustrates a really good point is, none of this means that companies should or are going to stop investing in environmental friendly solutions. Okay.
Right.
None of this means that's going to happen.
No, and I think one of the
The
biggest
ones
things,
that work.
Yes, the ones that work.
and Irina, I think one of the biggest things that we see is it's not that I'm sitting here with my oil and gas for new executives nuclear hat. I am an oil and gas kind of guy, but I love nuclear. I love no waste or no damage to the environment. That's what this is all about. Isn't that? And you write about that all the time. I mean, it's about the environment.
Well, yeah, it's also about what works in the best and most efficient way. And as we've seen with solar and wind, outside of certain niche areas, like where it's really difficult to connect to the grid or something like that, it's really an abuse of the planet, I would submit. It takes up way more space, endangers way more animals and land and water and air to some extent. If you're looking at hydro, for example, there's significant impacts on the environment. Then you have the built environment, which apparently we're supposed to care about, except when it comes to that, there's always seems to be exceptions for pursuing this ideology. And it becomes an issue. If there's something better that comes along, like fusion or whatever, I would absolutely jump on that, but it's not there yet. And until those things are there, the best that we have are oil, gas, coal, hydro in some areas that have already been developed, and nuclear. So
I'd love to see nuclear exported from countries that have it to those that don't. And Tammy, on your stories this week, you had Carney defends carbon strategy. Holy smokes, Batman! What a good timing! This was a great, intro to your stories this week. Says trade with Europe, Asia depends on it. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I heard this guy. I don't know who he is.
So he's right about. So he's the new leader of the Liberal Party, and I guess as prime minister. But he called an election yesterday, so we'll have our election at the end of April. And his very first trip was to jet around to Paris and London, a really quick 2-day trip where it looks like he was trying and get Canada to be able to buy or be involved in the new EU defense procurement stuff, and is looking to buy European equipment, I guess, or something instead of American, which, what's the interoperability with NORAD and, whatever, continental defense. I recall Canada had bought some European little light trucks or something back in the late 80s, early 90s that were terrible, couldn't even run in the winter. So, we have a history of making poor decisions with respect to defense procurement, especially with our relationship with Europe. Anyway, but what he said there is that when he talks about carbon strategy, he's talking about mandatory climate disclosures and carbon tax. So he's got rid of the personal carbon tax that everybody could see that everyone was paying, and it was very visible. So he got rid of that. He set it to 0, but is going to increase what is currently being charged to industry. So industry will end up picking up the slack for whatever they were charging for individuals. And he's saying we absolutely have to have it in order to trade with Europe because of Europe's carbon border adjustment mechanism. And it requires mandatory climate disclosures. It requires being able to account and verify your emissions. And then if you have a carbon tax, it gets deducted off what you would have to pay through this tariff. Then he said Asia depends on it. Actually, Asia doesn't. And so that was just a straight up lie. He was misspeaking, I suppose. So where he says you need it for Europe, absolutely, but we have 8% of Canada's trade goes to the European Union. Why would you want to increase that? And then on the one hand, he's complaining that America wants to make us a 51st state, but then he said, let's go join the EU. So how is that any different? In fact, it'd be worse if Canada were to join the EU because member states are forced to put into their own law what the European Union decides. So you really have little control over what you're doing. It has to be in complete alignment with what Europe is doing or the European Commission. So that would actually be worse for Canada than if it were to have some kind of relationship with the United States. And then, as I mentioned before, Ed Miliband jetted off to China, was there for a couple of days, signing these memorandum of understanding. And the solar panels that he's buying to put on all English schools and hospitals are made in China. And will likely, they might be made using coal. Might be, probably.
Might.
Yeah, come on, give me a break. And is it using slave labor? Yeah, from his perspective, doesn't matter. We just need to have lots of solar panels. And we were driving around the UK countryside on the weekend and saw a whole bunch of really beautiful farm fields being solar panel installations going up.
Oh.
Hundreds, if not thousands of acres of farmland being used for solar. So.
One question. This personal carbon tax that Carney set to 0, wasn't that personal carbon tax originally placed on citizens in Canada by his own political party?
Yeah. And that was this is what the Conservatives have been railing on about for at least 3 years. The whole campaign was axe the tax. So Carney's like, oh, look, we did it. And so in typical hypocritical fashion, on the one hand saying, we're not American, America's bad, he then sets up a little table and pretends to do an executive order, which you can't do in Canada, and then signs it like Trump does. I'm like, okay, so America's bad, but let's copy them in all these different things.
You just can't make this stuff up.
Yeah, the carbon market scale, you're absolutely right. You have to be on the in group in order to participate in the carbon market. Now there's a group where they're putting some chemicals into the water in the sea off the coast of Nova Scotia in Halifax Harbor, where it's supposed to capture CO2 and turn it into stone, or I don't know, something in the water. And they're getting carbon credits that they're selling to companies like Google, Google Alphabet, Meta, I think was one of them. Microsoft was one of them. There was like a list of about 5 companies. Stripe is the one that set it up. Mark Carney used to be on the board of Stripe. And so they set up this carbon market where if you're actually removing CO2 and storing it away, then you can participate in the carbon market. But if you're you have to demonstrate that you're actually storing it in order to be part of these things. So it's kind of weird how they set that up.
Canada could copy the U.S. better if Alberta became our 51st state. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, that's my thing. Thank you.
Good job.
Excellent.
And your Substack?
Yes, so it's the nemothreport.substack.com, and I've been working on this carbon border adjustment mechanism piece for a long time, but I realized it's way too long, so I'm going to break it up into a couple of different parts. So the
Outstanding.
first part should be up today.
So put it as paid subscribers only. That would be the best way to do that.
Well, I don't do paid subscriptions right now. I'm just it's just all out there.
You should. And let's go to Irina next here. There we go, Irina.
Thanks, but could I please address Greg's second comment, which presents certain news?
Greg.
Germany anchors net zero by 2045 in constitution. Germany is on a suicide mission.
Yes.
Emissions from global construction sector stop rising. Okay, are we sure? BYD unveils new EV tech to charge a vehicle in just 5 minutes. Does anyone need any more evidence that the Chinese are killing it technologically when it comes to EVs? I mean, there's no debate about that. Germany earmarks 100 billion euros for climate action. Yes, because the party that won the elections needs green votes to pass these changes, and it had to make promises. Germany has been in a recession for 2 years, all thanks to its climate policies. EVs are going to save you 20 million tons of CO2 emissions in 2025. If this is according to Amber, I'm sorry, but I'm taking it with a really big pinch of salt. And Germany is on track to hit 2030 climate goal of cutting emissions to 65% below 1990. Of course, because they are in a recession, because they are industrializing. If you cannot afford to use the energy that you possibly produce, you will use less energy. And this will work towards hitting these emission targets. So please, I mean, let's be serious.
If you go live in a tent, you're not emitting.
Right. Yeah. You wouldn't be very comfortable.
But Germany is the poster child for this. You depress your economy, you deindustrialize, you send all the emissions to China, and you pretend you're helping the earth.
Exactly. Germany is the case study that we all wanted to see, and the UK as well, and they're both failing. I mean,
David, you also mentioned Germany, but I believe there is the close second behind that with the UK, New York, Delaware, California, and a couple others. Sorry, Irina. Here's your stories for today.
No, that's okay. Now, the first story, I think I already referenced some of the stuff I've written in there about corporates walking back their climate commitments and pretending it didn't happen and citing challenges and supply chain problems and all this. But ultimately, they're going back on what previously used to be their top priority: climate action, emission reduction, scope 3 reporting, and all that. They saw it's not working. They saw it's not making money. So now they are, they're going back on these pledges. It's not just banks. It's all sorts of companies. Aviva, the insurance giant in Europe, did just that. And some companies in Europe before they tied ESG performance to executives remuneration. Now they are decoupling ESG targets from the compensation packages of executives because it's not making sense, and they'll never make any money. That's that. What was the second story? Oh, yeah, that's a lovely headline from the Wall Street Journal. How the fossil fuel industry gets its revenge on green activists. This is not a revenge. This is justice, you people.
Justice.
Well, the green activists have been, destroying stuff and protesting and interfering with people's lives. I like this angle, Tammy. for years, and they have assumed that nobody will ever do anything to stop them, and they will not be punished whatever they do. I assume short of killing someone. But now with this verdict against Greenpeace, and did you hear about the Just Stop Oil people who appealed their sentences, but only some of them got reduced by a year, and the others were, they were upheld by the court, which is again a win. It's not a matter of revenge; it's a matter of punishment for wrong action, for wrongdoing.
I think the people that are like actually terrorizing Tesla right now deserve their 20 years in jail when they do fire bombs and those kind of things. I hope.
And what about the emissions from these fires? All these battery fires, that's some serious emission generation going on. That do they not care?
I want to know from our listeners if they have any questions, but I'm hearing that everybody that I know is running out and buying a Tesla, and they're actually going to do. I think this is maybe a marketing strategy. I don't know how, but I think that they're actually. I'm trying to find out how many Teslas.
A bit of a boom in their sales. Yes,
I think it's actually increasing sales.
It is. Yes.
So.
It is?
Yes,
I would want to see.
I want to see numbers on it, and I'm trying to find those. But
we'll see at the end of the month. Yeah.
Yep. How do we find your Substack there?
By typing Irina Slav on Energy or just Irina Slav plus Substack.
And
it's right there on Google.
I love your articles also on oilprice.com as well too. So those are
the headline too. The shocking truth about actions. That's perfect headline.
Real shocker.
And let's go to David next here. I'm trying to find your slide here. I think it's this one. There you go, David.
Okay, so the second one, let's look at that first. That's the op-ed that Al Gore wrote in the Wall Street Journal this week, and we've talked about that already. Al is very upset that the tide has turned against him and is beginning to lash out. Texas electric dream collapses as car maker possibly enters a BlackBerry moment. This is from an investment advisory website. I'm trying to remember what it's called. God almighty, I can't remember. Anyway, so their thesis is, we all remember that BlackBerry was the personal handheld device that dominated the market for a decade before Apple introduced the first iPhone in 2007. And that step change in technology by Apple, which kept up and recognized societal trends and took advantage of the new technology and introduced this step change in technology, collapsed BlackBerry. BlackBerry still exists, but it's a dramatically reduced market share company from what it used to be. So this Seeking Alpha is the website where this article appeared. Their thesis is that, Tesla's facing the same kind of dilemma because of all these violent attacks on its infrastructure and its cars. I don't think that's true. I think actually this is a real buying opportunity for Tesla. The stock price has fallen by half since January, and is a real good time for people to be investing in Tesla. Because what people don't really understand about Tesla, it's a highly diversified company. Yes, I mean, sales of its cars is its main revenue stream, but it is developing all sorts of other technologies that it is selling all over the world. And it's a very robust business model at this point. It's not the same one-trick pony it was 10 years ago. Elon Musk is not a stupid man. He's probably the most brilliant business mind of our generation and maybe any generation. And so probably this is a real buying opportunity to invest in Tesla, not a BlackBerry moment. But I thought it was interesting that story got written.
It's really stupid because there's no better technology in EVs. People are burning cars because they're angry.
They're stupid and angry. And it's all an organized campaign. What people need to understand about the attacks on Tesla is this is all a campaign organized by a dark money group funded by George Soros and the Open Society Foundations. It's going to last for a limited amount of time, and then there's going to be a full recovery in Tesla and Tesla stock. Yes, the market has plateaued for electric vehicles in the United States, at least temporarily, but think about who their competitors are. Every pure play EV company competitor to Tesla in the United States is either in bankruptcy or teetering on the brink of
Or about.
bankruptcy.
Yeah.
And the EV divisions at Ford and GM are failing disastrously. Ford's lost $5 billion each of the last 2 years on its EV business unit and probably won't continue in the same form going ahead. They've talked about rejiggering their plan to invest in hybrids rather than pure play electric vehicles. And so everybody's failing but Tesla in this market in the United States. This is a buying opportunity.
You bet. My father-in-law just picked up his yesterday. So, I mean, it's pretty cool.
Really?
Yeah.
I'll never buy one. I'm not going to go out and buy an EV. I don't like the technology, but look, people need to understand what Tesla is and what it isn't.
Their robots are making a major announcements here very quickly, and I think that is a whole new animal for them. David, and your Substack. I'm trying to get to your Substack here. There we are.
It's very simple.
Sorry,
Blackmon.
gotta go, guys. Sorry.
Bye, Irina.
Bye, Irina.
See you next week.
There you go.
See me at Blackmon.substack, Energy Transition Realities. Love to have you there. You'll get a laugh every once in a while.
And if you really care about emissions, people should buy a Prius. Toyota has been great withstanding the net zero movement. I love Toyota, and I think they're leading the world in hybrids. And quite honestly, I think hybrids are the technology forward to lower emissions. I'm all in on let's be good on the environment.
Yeah.
I think that is a wonderful kind of a thing. So, and for our stories here, we've already covered the Heathrow outage on net zero. I think that exemplifies totally what is going on with the net zero policies based on false climate narratives equals a false narrative of a energy secure country. And I think this is going to bold into one other next statement. There will be those countries with fiscal responsibility and growth, and there will be those countries without fiscal responsibility and growth, and they're going to be in decline. We're going to see a microcosm of that in the United States, and that's going to be the blue states are going to be failing even further. The red states are going to be successful until more of the blue people come into the blue states. And if we don't get our elections fixed, the whole thing's going to fall. So sorry about that one. But this next story bringing up here is Trump-Zelensky ceasefire conditions on U.S. looks at buying a nuclear power plant. And I find this one very interesting and very important from several different aspects. Zelensky went to the EU and reportedly was offering the minerals to the UK, and then he also offered the minerals to the EU. So I think those minerals are actually worthless, and Trump is actually doing a great thing and saying, okay, I don't need your stinking minerals. I will take your grid. Holy smokes, Batman. So now, if you think about it, what has Russia done great? They have a 4% GDP growth last year. With a 4% GDP growth, countries love 4%. And so when you sit back and what are they exporting? They're exporting energy. They're exporting their nuclear technology. They're exporting their oil. They're exporting their LNG, but their LNG has had a really hard time because their dark fleet is not nearly as much. But in this case, if the United States export clean technology for scrubbers, we do coal generation better than anybody else. Why don't we export that to India and China and teach them how to really clean the emissions out of coal plants? Oh, we could make a lot of money. it's kind of like Canada in their turbine generators that are needed for natural gas plants and pipelines. Canada does a great job on those things. If you focused on that technology, Canada would be doing very well on those kind of exports because their turbines are phenomenal and needed. So if United States focused on owning grids around, let's say, Africa, and we helped jobs in Africa would help jobs in the United States, that to me makes sense.
That wouldn't happen in Africa until the World Bank and IMF leadership changes.
Yep.
Because, I mean, if the United States were to go in and make those investments, I think people would be upset because they're trying to get the debt under control. So why go and try and make these U.S. government investments in places like Africa? I understand the Ukraine one because I think Trump is working from the perspective, if we own that nuclear power plant and Russia attacks it, that's a declaration of war against America. And that was the whole point of him wanting to be able to be involved with the rare earths and the different minerals in Ukraine, because then it would be like, if Russia's trying to do something, then that's an attack on the United States. But,
That's right.
you know, to do that in Africa, I don't know. I don't see that there would be a real public support for that in the United States. But hey, you guys are American. What do you think?
I'm thinking that if we did something other than what we're doing now, it would be successful. And what we're doing now is funding USAID, which is the CIA, and overturning governments around the world. I think if we actually tried to become business partners, I think that it would make a huge difference. And when I visited with NJ Anuk, who is the head of the African Energy Chamber, he's out there saying, don't give us any more handouts. Give us and work with us as business partners. And he's out there. We're seeing more and more United States big oil companies going and drilling all over the world. Look at Kazakhstan. I can't even say it. I'm from Oklahoma, Texas. And you take a look at Kazakhstan, and it's got Exxon, you've got Luke Oil, which is 5% of it, but you've got Chevron in there at 50% of the production over there. That's where you take a look at that same expertise, but let's export our great, how we get clean energy and produce it and make that a focus. I think that would be a much better solution.
Yeah. Help with the trade deficit too.
Oh, absolutely. And then you can find me on theenergynewsbeat.substack.com or energynewsbeat.co or energynewsbeat.com. And then after that, we would be like these dogs having a great day. Now, I can only play this song for 10 seconds because it now gets into a copyright, so I'm going to cut that out after this. But these dogs, imagine playing that song in your head as these dogs are just zipping around and doing this. This is United States exporting clean energy around the world, and everybody's happy and business partners, as opposed to having us overthrow businesses and countries. I think this is the way we need to do business.
Yeah, to be responsible, to have responsible development.
So with that, I think we had an absolute blast. David, any last words?
No, man. Last week was one of the busiest weeks in major energy stories I've ever seen, and we missed even some big stories on this podcast that maybe we can get to them next week. So it's great. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
What do you think they were? What were the
one thing was our Secretary of Energy classifying climate alarmism as a quasi-religious movement. Imagine 3 years ago if any official in any government in the Western world had said that. It would have been the major news story for a week. And instead, nobody in the media even talked about it. It's awesome.
This is the reaction from them when they found out that they were just classified. Sorry. Can you imagine that? That is Al Gore on the left as he realized he was now, classified as bad. So sorry
Losing
about
out on his carbon credit scam. Yeah.
that. That's right.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think it was a great show for Tammy. And what are your last thoughts?
I would just say to Brian Zinchuk, who had a comment about Qatar's LNG, from what I understand, Qatar has been looking at some kind of emissions trading system, but they don't have one. They don't have a carbon tax. And they made basically a threat to the EU saying that if the EU was going to follow through and put LNG under this climate disclosure and carbon border adjustment mechanism system, then they would find other markets that they would stop shipping to the European Union. So yeah, it's the same thing would be for Canada. We could make a business case for LNG for sure, but it becomes a matter of, do we want to participate in these types of emission systems that will add the expense on the business side, on the exporter side, and then then the importer would pay whatever difference that is. So,
yeah.
Well, all right. Well, thanks, guys. I think with that, we will call this a show. Have a great day, and thanks for all the great comments from Gail and David and Brian and Patrick. We sure love everybody. Have a great day. We will see you guys next week.
thanks
Next week.
everyone. Have a great week. Bye.